Hello everyone, my name is Paul and welcome back to the new news. I hope that you all are having a great day. I hope that everyone is safe, that your family and your friends are safe, and I hope you're enjoying this magnificent weekend that we're having. I know if we've, at least here where I'm at, we've had some rather nice weather. I apologize if you hear anything in the background. It is Memorial Day weekend here in the United States, and that kind of brings along, to my delight, fireworks season. I did grow up loving fireworks, but due to some past experiences, specifically when I was in the military, I have a little bit of a hard time with them now. So I apologize if you're hearing that in the background. There is quite a few people across town right now shooting off some decently sized ones. So I apologize for that up front. But we're going to go ahead and power through. There's a lot of stuff that's going on in the world today. There's a lot of different developments inside of Ukraine. There's a lot of stuff regarding the Islamic State. And of course, there's a lot of stuff that is regarding with extreme climate issues, global warming, and a lot of crises in general. And because of this, millions and millions of people are affected. Millions of people, not just in Ukraine, in the surrounding countries, but also places like the Horn of Africa, in Southeast Asia, which is having issues. In Brazil now, which we'll get to later today during the stream, they are also now going through some rather difficult times when it comes to catastrophes and natural disasters. So we're still looking for more, but please check out the donation links in the description below. So that way, not only do we want to be able to deliver this news, we want to be able to give back to the very same things that we are talking about in the news here. And we want to be able to help millions of people worldwide, not just because of the war in Ukraine, but because long after the war in Ukraine ends, there will always be some kind of a crisis and there will always be people in need. And we can only do that with your support. So please, go ahead, check out the description. If you can't give a lot, give a little. If you can't give anything at all, give us a like and subscribe because it helps us reach more people. The more people can come, get this news, hear about what's going on, and also make a meaningful difference in millions of people's lives globally as we're going through and reporting that. That is our mission. That will always be our mission, and that is what we are going for, and we can only do that with your support. So for those that have already supported us, I cannot thank you enough. We're sitting at around 40 right now that are subscribed, and I really do appreciate it. Everyone on the team appreciates it, and we are always looking to find some more people that will enjoy what we're doing and what we're trying to do. So thank you very much to those that already support us in the efforts, and I hope that you will continue to do so. And with that, we're going to go ahead and jump right into the news. And of course, we start with our special report, which is here in Ukraine. And a couple of developments here in Ukraine. First of all, the Kalush Orchestra actually sold their award. They had a crystal microphone that they were given at the 2022 Eurovision Song Contest, and they won. Kalush Orchestra did. They ended up selling it for a Ukrainian cryptocurrency called Whitebit for roughly $900,000, all of which they have donated to Ukraine in order to assist with the ongoing war efforts and reconstruction efforts. So great to hear that during the Eurovision Song Contest, they are very vocal about the war in Ukraine and how it's impacted them. And of course, at the time, the Battle of Mariupol was still raging, and that was very fresh in everyone's minds and what was going on there. And it was really becoming a bitter end. But they did end up selling that, so it's good to see. There is the award there. But it's good to see that they are contributing everything they can to the ongoing war effort. And another piece of rather good news out of Ukraine today is the fact that Kyiv is celebrating 1,540 years as a city. This city was originally founded, at least as far as they are tracking, in 482 AD. It's 1,540 years old as of today. And experts actually believe the city may be much older, it going officially being founded possibly as far back as 2,000 years ago. But according to archaeologists, in the first settlements in the area thus far being discovered could be traced as far back as 25,000 years ago. So this region is extremely old. It has a very diverse and it has a very lengthy history to it. And obviously settlements and everything in this region, I mean, essentially what this tells us is there have been people living in Kyiv and in the surrounding region for the last roughly 25,000 years. This is a very storied city. This is a very storied region. Ukraine has a very vast amount of history, not just in the modern era, but going much further back in history. Everyone talks about the World War II, the Soviet Union, the Cossacks. Everyone talks about that stuff, but there's so much more to history than just the last, couple of hundred years. So, very cool little development coming out of Ukraine regarding that, and they are saying here's to 1,540 years and 1,540 more. So, I do agree with them on that, and it looks like that Kyiv shouldn't be in any immense amounts of danger in the near future. And that brings us over into Kharkiv. And the first thing that we have is at the Marifa solar plant. So Marifa has several different solar plants. You can see one down here. There's one over here as well. There's a brand new solar plant in Marifa, which is in the Kharkiv Oblast. And this is a solar power substation that was hit by Russian missiles, and it severely damaged the infrastructure. We actually have the photo here of the destruction. So, I mean, brand new solar plant. So, and these are not cheap. This is actually something that a member of my family, my direct family, is actually what they do is they sell solar panels, and they deal with solar panels globally, including inside of Ukraine. And their company has actually been very good regarding the ongoing war in Ukraine. There's a lot of Ukrainian citizens that work for them. So, so I'm sure this will get replaced, and I'm sure this will get fixed. But nonetheless, this continues to show the fact that Russian forces are continue to hit critical infrastructure that's valuable to the civilian population, as well as it could, while of course the energy is being used for civilian or for, probable military as well. There are military aspects to hit this. The key thing is that it's being mostly used for civilian population. Like, these power substations are powering Marifa. These are powering homes. These are powering businesses. These are powering schools and hospitals. And that, when that is what this stuff's being used for, then under the Geneva Convention, you have to leave that kind of stuff alone. Just because if you can't prove that it's a military target, or if it doesn't have as much of an advantage as being destroyed as a military target, and that it does harm the civilian populace, you have to leave it alone. So once again, we see that, and that's something that I hit on the other day. Now, that's not the only thing going on in the Kharkiv Oblast. As we see here, Zelensky actually visited Kharkiv today. So President Zelensky, for the first time since the beginning of the war, has left the Kyiv region, and he went to the second largest city in Ukraine, Kharkiv, and actually had a visit there. See kind of the destruction, what's going on there. There's other rumors regarding this, but we can go ahead and take a look at this.
Їх зараз відсунули по тому напрямку десь на 20 кілометрів, тоді вже ми можемо і актувати будинки, відновлювати інфраструктуру тощо. У нас залишилося по нашим підрахункам без житла 15 тисяч людей. Значить, в такому стані 24 будинки, всього багатоповерхівок по місту Харкова 2100.
Я б насправді розглядав у нашої зовнішніх приміщених людей 160 перекомовних там. І я би скоріше за це розглядав спочатку.
Якщо потрапляння ось таке було, то вже дім відновленню не підлягає, тому що він втратив свої здатності несущої, тобто конструкції.
Це
So as you can see, Zelensky went and he visited Kharkiv today. Now so there was apparently a couple of interesting messages that got put forward. And one of them said that the Geneva Convention is useless. And I believe this is from Guillermo. And he said, what about Guantanamo? That's in reference to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, which is a U.S. base in Cuba that is still there. And Guantanamo Bay specifically has been used in order to house terrorists, and members of the Taliban, members of Al-Qaeda, members of the Islamic State, and the allegations regarding this are regards to a lot of the detainee efforts. Keep in mind, most of those interrogations actually did not occur at Guantanamo Bay. While Guantanamo Bay did have some of those operations, most of those were actually conducted at black sites throughout the Middle East and not in Guantanamo Bay. Guantanamo Bay is used as a holding facility after these guys have been interrogated and shipped back to the United States. A lot of them are awaiting trial for a lot of their terror attacks, including the attempts for the plots in the 1991 bombing. I believe in 1991. Bombing of the World Trade Center, and also the attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon during the 9/11 attacks in 9/11/2001. So, yes, did that stuff happen? Did those torture sessions occur? Yes. It is well documented that they have occurred. Yes, they did happen. Yes, is it a good thing? No. Should it have happened? No. But you could say that about a lot of things. And this is something that gets brought up over and over and over again. The wars that the United States have conducted themselves in. Listen, I was in the Marine Corps. I was in the United States Marine Corps. I fought against ISIS. I spent 4.5 months in Syria. I spent time in Iraq. So there's a lot of stuff that did indeed happen. And that isn't really the way we do things anymore. There's a lot of stuff, once that information came out and once that became public, because there's every government does something that they really don't want people to know about. That's just an unfortunate fact of the world. But once that information came out, those really stopped. The treatment really stopped. But you have to understand the mentalities where this stuff is coming from. So you have to really go to these places to understand why this kind of thing happens. When I was in Syria, specifically I was in Deir ez-Zor province, Syria, which is here. I'm going to say this general area of Syria where my cursor is circling right now, because I'm not going to give away any of the current or former locations of U.S. military installations. We actually caught very high-level ISIS members, specifically number 4 is the one that we, at the time, number 4. But it was very frustrating because one of our posts that we held security at, was on top of an ISIS prison. It was a former ISIS prison. And in the walls, you could see where people had scratched into the walls while being tortured by the Islamic State. There were bullet casings littered everywhere from where they were conducting summary executions. Think about that. This stuff looks like the ISIS prison looked much more like a gas chamber, where you can still see the scratches in the walls today, than it did any other kind of prison that I have ever seen in my life. That is frustrating. And same with the war in Ukraine. Is it highly publicized? No. But we've already talked about here on this channel allegations of war crimes committed by territorial defense members. Because that, while in whole, it is just what Ukraine is doing, there are still things that are going to happen. The Allies were not perfect during World War II. There were several massacres by the Allies during World War II. There were several things that went wrong during the Iraq War. Things are not, no matter how just, no matter how perfect your true cause is, that does not mean that things do not happen. People have free will, and not everyone is a good person, and we have to understand that. We have to move forward with that. Is the Geneva Convention pointless? I do not think so. I have personally had to put myself in detriment in order to uphold the Geneva Convention. That could have cost my either a severe injury or loss of life to myself or those that were around me during the point in time. Is it pointless? No. Is it violated? Yes. And what needs to happen is people need to be held accountable. People from the Iraq War and the war in Afghanistan were held accountable for those actions. They are currently sitting in Fort Leavenworth for doing things such as shake and bakes, where they used white phosphorus in order to burn infantry, in order to burn insurgents. There are currently ongoing cases in The Hague right now regarding the insane amount of war crimes going on in Ukraine. Several of the individuals who conducted a lot of these interrogations against detainees were relieved of their duties and very unceremoniously removed from their commands to have an unknown fate, to say the least, to not get into very many details on it, from what I do know. And the way that a lot of our rules of engagements have changed over the course of time. Is it perfect? No. Nothing that anyone will ever do is perfect. There is no amount of laws or... it's against the law to commit murder. Does it still happen? Yes. It's against the law to carry a weapon without a concealed carry permit. Does it, at least in the United States, does it still happen? Yes. Because criminals and people with ill intentions will do those intentions regardless of what you do to stop them. You can limit them all that you want, but there will always be a need for security. There will always be a need for some kind of accountability, because criminals and people with ill intentions are always going to exist. There's always going, when it comes to wide-scale systematic use of it, such as detainees against terrorists. First of all, the terrorist organizations do not care about the Geneva Convention. They didn't sign the Geneva Convention. They're terrorists. They cause terror. That is their point. That is what they are doing. They are extremists in their ideologies, and they will do anything to achieve their objectives within those ideologies. And therefore, especially when you have nearly 3,000 people get killed, innocent civilians, there is a want for revenge. And that drives a lot of people to do some very unfortunate things. And while it's still wrong, we have to understand that we have a duty to ourselves and to the world to uphold these principles. So, is it useless? No. I think on the very complete opposite spectrum, these are things that allow us to hold people accountable, and should they either be captured or killed, we can hold them accountable. Specifically to be captured. If they're killed, the justice is already served. But I don't believe they're useless. So, I appreciate your comments on that. While I disagree, we can have further discussions on this. We have our Discord in the link below. I would love to have a discussion regarding it if you really wanted to. But I have a lot of rather intimate knowledge and unfortunately a lot of backstory regarding incidents regarding some of this stuff. And I have a lot of personal thoughts and feelings on this issue. But I believe just at a standpoint of what you've seen over the last, really since the beginning of the Geneva Conventions, the loss of life and suffering has really decreased, especially post-World War II, on a very mass scale. So, I mean, it's obviously worked to some extent. Even if the system's not perfect and there's always going to be improvements for it, you can always do something. And it's not up to a government or a convention to hold us accountable. We as human beings must hold ourselves accountable. So with that, we're going to go ahead and move on. And that's because we're going to move on to SEVERODONETSK. And SEVERODONETSK is really the focus point of the ongoing war in Ukraine. While, of course, the whole Donbass is still a continual war zone. This thing is an absolutely massive front lines. You have to see the fact that Severodonetsk is a very key city. If they take Severodonetsk, they take control realistically of the entire Luhansk region. Currently, Russia holds roughly about 95% of the Luhansk region under its control or under separatist control. Right now, the Severodonetsk is really what's holding them up. That's where the military administrations is. That's where really all the Ukrainian government for the Luhansk region is running out of. And that is where we are seeing some of the most bitter fighting on the front lines right now. They are, as we can tell, on the outskirts of the city. There's bitter fighting along specifically this entire border that I'm currently going over here. So this is where this front lines is occurring. I have it officially put on just outside of the outskirts of the city as being where Russian lines are, because I cannot tell how far their incursion is and if they have any actual control outside of just outside the city's borders. I can't tell if they have any actual control within the city. It is a very fluid situation, as any combat is. And so that is changing minute by minute, second by second, not just day by day. So this is not something that we can accurately report until major changes in the front line have occurred. And we can see some of this as several people have gone through and actually talked about, this is kind of where the battle is currently taking place. This is kind of where we're looking at Ukrainian versus Russian forces. And we've also heard, and they talk about this here, but there are rumors of collapse of Ukrainian positions, and also that the Russians have taken control of Severodonetsk, as several Russian sources are saying. This is not the case. There's still very stiff resistance in the city as a whole still stands, but we are probably looking at a very tough ongoing battle roughly on the front lines, and I'll hit this a little bit later. There's a 1-to-1 ratio in firepower and parity between the Russian and Ukrainian forces, and that is quickly shifting in the Ukrainians' favor as more equipment and supplies come in from Western countries. That is really shifting it into Ukraine's favor, and we see this as Russia continues to attempt to pour more and more assets into this fight. We've seen them pull T-62s out of storage in order to bring them into the fight, and we will continue to probably see them try to catch up. But they're one country that really wasn't prepared for war, trying to catch up against what is essentially 30 plus countries supplying one. So you're really seeing a difficult time for the Russians at this point, and I don't believe that they will make any meaningful gains in Severodonetsk in the near future. And we can kind of see this reflected out of the Ukrainian troops as their spirits remain rather high throughout this entire engagement. So let's take a look at kind of how they are feeling right now.
Донецк пиздуем.
And Guillermo asked another question that's pretty good, and they were asking, did they dig in Severodonetsk? They did, actually. So Severodonetsk has a significant amount of defensive lines that were around the city. And you're talking about trench lines that are running. I'm not going to talk about actual positions, really, but we're talking about roughly, a couple kilometers outside of the city. The issue is that Russia attempted to conduct a pincer movement. They attempted to encircle Severodonetsk, and they've been pouring a lot of forces into this one area. There's a very high concentration of Russian forces. And Russia really has three prongs of attack when it's going by its doctrine, which we've seen throughout the duration of this war. And it really understands their means and their methods, whether that's good or bad. And it does have its uses, And the Donbass is where they will see the most effectiveness with their doctrine. So the first thing that they use is they use artillery to saturate an area and soften up defensive positions. They immediately follow this up with an armored spearhead that is unsupported, meaning they push a lot of armor, BMPs, BMDs, BTRs, MTLBs, and of course your different tanks, whether that's a T80, T6, or T80, T62, T72, T90, or any of the variants thereof of those different types of tanks. And they basically use these tanks in an overwhelming number to using maneuver warfare to close with the enemy and break through their lines with an armored force. And then you're going to see infantry follow up from behind the armor, and then they're going to mop up the resistance afterwards in close combat. That is what the Russian tactic is. It's mostly meant because of the large steppe, essentially. It's very large. When you're talking about Russia, you're talking about very large open fields of maneuver warfare. This is really a doctrine that was used heavily by the Russians during World War II. And then that's kind of the late war game that they played. But you see that getting developed further and further and further as they continue throughout the Cold War. And really, things haven't changed since the Cold War for Russian doctrine. The weaponry is just kind of improved. And I say kind of because we can see that it still falls short. But that is what they did, and it ended up breaking through Ukrainian defensive lines. Ukrainian forces are getting absolutely pounded along this entire front line with mass concentrations of artillery. This is similar, more or less, to what you would have seen during World War I, less of what you expect to see during a modern war in the 21st century. You can just look at some of the images of the open fields just plastered with craters. This looks much more like Flanders in 1917 than it does a modern war. That is the crazy historical comparison here. But that is the name of the game. Artillery usage, you're going to see that heavily throughout and we have seen that heavily even here on the channel. And you're going to see large armored spearheads, and you're going to see a lot of Ukrainian and Russian forces and very slow moving defensive positions, static defenses. They will dig in, they will conduct large scale artillery bombardments against each other, and then they're going to try and push on each other, and they're going to continue doing that in small increments throughout this entire war zone unless they're fighting in an urban area, which is the transition. What the Russians don't do is they don't think about what it takes to take a city. And that is one of the factors that's going to cause high casualty rates for them. Whenever a military planner is looking at fighting in an urban environment, this is called MOUT, Military Operations in Urban Terrain. And one of the considerations that, at least in the United States, that we take into account is that whenever you're conducting MOUT operations inside of a city or a village, that you should expect to take 80% or more casualties throughout the engagement, because it is that bloody. There's that many kill zones and danger zones throughout this entire area, and the Russian doctrine leaves a lot of armor unsupported, whereas U.S. doctrine puts a lot of the squishy guys in front of the really heavy tanks, because Russian doctrine, you can even see this in the design of their vehicles, puts a lot of steel in front of whatever's squishy. That's why their turret hatches open forward, is to protect the commander and the gunner. But you were going to see high casualty rates because tanks are going to roll in here unsupported, and then a guy can pull out from an alleyway and hit it with a couple of RPGs or whatever. The Javelin can easily be used in an urban environment. That's actually what I did. And that's kind of where we're going to see a lot of casualty points. And it's going to be a very tough slog, especially when you're looking at 1-to-1. And these Russian units have already been battered and beaten and thrown back together. They're basically taking two half-strength battalion tactical groups from earlier in the war, and they're putting them together to make a full one, and it's not working out in their favor. Is that how Fallujah went? Yes. Fallujah went terribly, for anyone that knows. I'm not going to go into the history of that, but I had, when I was in the Marine Corps, several of my senior enlisted, so a lot of my staff sergeants and my gunnies were actually Fallujah veterans. So I heard some very lovely stories about the Battle of Fallujah. But yes, it was a very bloody engagement, to say the least. And that's why 1-6 is 1-6 hard. And from that, we're going to go down here a little bit further south. And this is over at Altshevsk. Once again, I apologize. I cannot pronounce Ukrainian or Russian very well. I can't hardly pronounce English, but that's beside the point. We can see a couple of Ka-52 alligators flying extremely low, as well as a couple of other different rotor wing air assets. And when I mean low, I mean we've seen them fly low. This is even lower than that. What they're trying to do is they're using there's kind of a little pond here just outside the city, and a couple of different ponds and lakes, and they are diving down, and this is called nap of the earth flight, where they're diving down and they're actually in and amongst the trees. They go across this waterway. It's very easy to stay extremely low. There's no obstructions really, and then the trees are hiding them, so that way they don't get locked onto by man-pads or man-portable anti-air defense launchers such as the Stinger or the Igla or the Strela, so that way they can't get shot down. And that's these weapon systems, these man-pads, are really the main reason why the airspace over Ukraine remains contested, and to the point that Russian pilots have to be so careful. And so let's take a look. You'll see what I mean. These guys are absolutely low. It's insane that pilots get this low. So let's take a look. So here we go. That's a K. And like I said, these, you thought that we've seen low before. No, these guys are really, they're pushing it here. I mean, this is only a couple meters above the ground. And these pilots do train to do this. Even fighter pilots train to do low-level flight like this. But this is still rather extreme for that. But we've seen them have to take rather extreme measures throughout the duration of the war. Speed up a little here. He's showing off a little bit. But yeah. I mean, you could almost reach up and touch touch the pylons hanging off of that. That's pretty low. And we have another one too. A little bit further away. But we can see these guys. They are really pushing it down to nap of the earth. These guys are flying a little bit more contour flight. Looks like there's a hind there. I think there's an Mi-8 that's following up behind it. Yeah, it looks like it's an Mi-8, probably an Mi-8 AMTSH. I can't really see the pylons on it. But we've seen them. It looks like a couple more hinds behind it too. But we've seen these guys conduct these flights before, and they have to stay low. They really do, because it's a death sentence to fly any higher. But a massive amount of air power being used throughout the duration of this war. So, another comment. I can only imagine what Saddam would have done had he had a bunch of man-pads. Well, that's the thing. He did. That's part of the problem. Saddam Hussein actually did have an extreme amount of man-pads. He had a lot of Iglas and Strelas, which are the Russian variants of basically the Stinger missile system. And they're very good. They've been put to very good use. In fact, we've even seen after the fall of the Ba'ath Party, insurgents used these to shoot down civilian aircraft, chartered flights, DHL flights, coming out of like Baghdad International Airport. So they were around. They were in the stockpiles. His troops just kind of routed. They didn't. While Iraq had like the 7th largest army in the world, it wasn't a good army, and that's part of your problem. And they did have some good tactics, especially during the Gulf War when they were conducting reverse slope defenses, which made total sense. Except the U.S. military had a little bit better technology than they did, being the 90s and the early 2000s, and they outflanked them. They really caught them off guard. They caught them when they were still in their spirals. Their spiral formations when they were encamped. They caught them in reverse slope defenses where they could see them, but the Iraqis couldn't see the Americans. And you also saw rather extensive use of high-level precision bombing during shock and awe that really knocked out radar installations and really knocked out a lot of the Iraqi ground support assets and logistical assets and command and control structures that make these shootdowns possible. The shootdowns themselves can be done in a limited amount just by the guys on the ground, but you really have to, you don't have a very long window, especially when you're talking about jets. You don't have a very long window to open fire on an aircraft unless you have a heads up. And those radar defense systems, those command and controls that can say, hey, this group spotted aircraft heading your direction. These spotted helicopters heading your direction 15 minutes ago. Be ready here with your Stingers and Iglas and Estrellas and whatever else you're going to use. That stuff is behind the scenes stuff that you never hear about and you're never going to. But command and control structures and early detection systems play a huge part in air defense and in a lot of aspects. Logistics too. Sure, he had a bunch of stockpiles, but if he didn't have, his troops didn't pull them out of stockpiles, they're useless if they're just sitting there. It doesn't matter how many you have. If your guys don't have them in their hands, it's pointless. So, yes, that he did have massive stockpiles of man pads. He just didn't use them. Or his troops surrendered en masse by the thousands, or they were wiped out. And we see continual use of heavy aircraft here in Ukraine. So, one, we saw the helicopters, and two, here, as we're taking a look, we can see over here, really kind of near Kusun, which is down in the southern part of the Donetsk, up in the northern part of the Donetsk Oblast. And we can see more Russian fighter jets as they're in support of these ground forces. And once again, these things are flying very low to avoid these man pads. They're going in, they're conducting their strikes, they're conducting close air support. And we also have to remember, Ukraine has a lot more jets up in the air now that are flying top cover. So they also have to be wary of enemy aircraft now, not just the man pads.
Боже упаси, у меня мурашки. Господи, они полетели назад. Вот эти были, я не знаю, что это было. От ракет, наверное, защищаются.
What you see, so you've seen this a lot, and you've seen it with both helicopters, and you've also seen it with jet aircraft. And that is when you see an aircraft, it shoots flares and pulls a very sharp turn and is shooting flares throughout the turn. What that is called it's called a break. If you're ever on a radio, you never say the word break to an aircraft. That means that there's an incoming rocket or missile. And what they do is they pop flares. It hopefully disorients the missile inbound, whether that's chaff and flares or just flares. And then they do a sharp turn, and this avoids the missile's pathing. So it disorients, and then you continue to disorient and conduct a very sharp turn to get out of the missile's path. And you're going to see that they do a lot of preemptive breaks, meaning before there's even a option for them to be shot at, they go ahead, they fire their munitions, and they immediately conduct a break. And sometimes you're going to see it as a reaction to what's going on, such as if you've ever seen the shoot downs from inside the cockpit of several K-52s, especially over Hostomel Airport. We got to see where they conducted reactive breaks when they received ground fire. And like I said, that 1-to-1 parity in firepower, and Russia is trying desperately to make up the advantage here. We're seeing large usage of artillery and of tanks and armored weapons throughout this entire front lines, and you're going to continue to see that. Russia is pulling everything it's got in order to make this offensive even possible, and they're going to continue to do this. This is really Russia's kind of almost Battle of the Bulge style attack. The Battle of the Bulge was the last major offensive Nazi Germany was able to do. They pulled everything they had, they pushed it into the Bulge, they tried to break through the Ardennes again, and they actually made a little bit of a dent here. We're kind of seeing the same thing with Russia. They pulled all their forces out of other areas, they formed them back together, they remade some battalion tactical groups out of whatever pieces were left of their original force. They are swarming in as much men, weaponry, ammunition, fuel, artillery, tanks that they can, pulling everything out of storage and thrusting it into this front, trying to make a difference. But it's a 1-to-1 parity right now, meaning whatever Russia is fielding, Ukraine is feeling just as much. In fact, in some aspects, even more. There are some statistics that are saying that Ukraine is fielding more tanks and armor assets than Russia is right now, which, when you're talking about heavily armored forces, is not where you want to be. And that is not going to change. Once again, Russia's at the disadvantage. They do not have the infrastructure set up. Then they have to pull a lot of older equipment out of storage. They were not expecting this war to happen this long, and they're trying to make an effort. There's one country really up against 30-something countries, like 35 or something countries that are supplying Ukraine. That is not where you want to be in a war, and they are trying desperately to make whatever gains they can right now, because they have to make them now if they're going to make them and keep them, or have any hope of keeping them. So that's what we're seeing here. This is just some Ukrainians over an overpass in the occupied area of Donetsk. Let's take a look. So someone had a question regarding the last video regarding the jets, and they asked if those were Su-28 Frogflits. So we haven't really seen a lot of the Su-28. It's a little bit of a newer aircraft for Russia, and they have very limited amount to deploy. What we really see is the predecessor to the Su-28, which is the Su-25. And we see a lot of that. They have a lot more of those aircraft and a lot more spare parts. Keep in mind, spare parts mean a lot when you're talking about aircraft. For instance, the F-16 requires roughly 17 hours of maintenance for every 1 hour of flight. So when you're talking about conducting massive sorties and over a prolonged period of time, having the spare parts to the Su-25 makes a big difference. The Su-28, much like the T-14 Armata, is very limited in its numbers and very limited in what they can produce. And also, it's a lot more expensive. And it's a war like this, unlike the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, which is mainly fighting insurgencies. It's really what country can produce more and which country can also fight more economically. Meaning, Russia can't afford to continue putting up its best assets, because they cannot afford to replace their losses. They have an eye-watering number of T-62s and T-72s. Whether they're upgraded or not, they have an eye-watering number of them, and the upgrades are going to be cheaper than building whole brand new T-14s to replace them. They can't replace the T-14s they already have. They have an eye-watering number of Su-25s. They do not have an eye-watering number of Su-28s. Which means that they would need to build instead of pulling some Su-25s out of storage, they would have to build entire new airframes for the Su-28. And that's really what you're seeing. You're seeing T-90s. You're seeing upgrade T-72s, which is the bulk of their armored force. You can make replacements of the T-72s that you lose. You can't make replacements of your T-14s. And they have too much invested in R&D, and they're too expensive, and they're too unreliable to be used in the war. Let's see here. So Russian equipment is known to be durable. Yes, Russian equipment is known to be durable, but so is any successful military piece of equipment is made to be durable. That's why I find the AR-15 versus AK argument to be stupid and all downright. They have good purposes on both sides. The AK-47 is also mass-produced in a lot more countries. It's like the ultimate bad guy gun. It's rugged, it's durable, but it has some flaws. The AR style weaponry, the Armalite system, with a closed, it has a much more closed bolt system. It has a dust cover and all this stuff. Is it a little bit more temperamental? Yes, but it's equally rugged and reliable in a lot of situations where the AK sometimes would not be, such as it's a lot more of a closed system. This means it's a lot harder for dirt and everything to get in there, but when dirt and stuff does get in there, it can cause issues. Same thing kind of goes with every piece of military equipment you're going to see fielded. Everything has its niche, everything has its purpose, but everything has its issues. Yes, is it rugged and reliable? Yeah, but it really doesn't matter if you blow it up. You know what I mean? Like, it's only as good as it gets used. It's only as good as the person using it. So it doesn't matter it doesn't matter if you have the best tank crew in the world with the best tank in the world. If my javelin can blow it all to hell, it doesn't matter because I'm going to win the fight. And your $16 million tank is going to be lost to my $100,000 missile, and that's a lot more economical. That's just how this war is going to work. Artillery shells, in the grand scheme of things, the artillery shells and rockets cost next to nothing compared to what they destroy. Manpad launchers, I can blow your $17 million aircraft out of the air, and you're going to lose a highly trained pilot and a highly valuable asset to another $100,000 missile from some guy on the ground that just saw it in the air and shot it out of the sky. That is what I mean by a war of economies. It's necessary you have to expect losses, but you have to know when to stop. You have to know when to stop because you cannot afford to be losing this much stuff because you're never going to be able to replace it. And if you're never going to be able to replace it in a meaningful amount of time, your security is forever ruined. At least for a long duration, it is ruined, and you're never going to be able to conduct large-scale military operations. We've already seen drawbacks of counter-terror operations in support of the Assad regime in Syria from Russia because they can't fight two wars at once, and that is what they're trying to do. Even though their military objectives in Syria are limited, which is why I still considered Russia a world power until now. Is because they were able to conduct global limited scope military operations. Russia can't do that anymore. They can't sustain it. And they're not able to sustain their forces just a couple hundred kilometers from where this is Russia. Sure, Russia's big, but it's a lot closer to ship it to Ukraine than it is to ship it to Syria. It's a hell of a lot easier. And they still can't keep their troops supplied and outfitted enough to actually fight this war. And it's a detriment to them, and they've always had an issue with logistics. And this war, that's what really hindered them in Georgia, and it's going to hinder them here. And we've seen it hinder them already, and we will continue to see so probably for the duration of the war. And then that's why Ukraine is ultimately likely going to be winning here in the next couple of weeks or months. And then down here in Mariupol, the filtration camps are getting heavily used. The filtration camp over in Bezymyn, we've heard of several reports of Ukrainian citizens being transported from Mariupol to Bezymyn in order to go through the filtration camp checkpoint system. I've talked about the filtration system before. It's essentially a concentration camp. It's a terrible thing. We do not want to do this. There are trials in the International Criminal Court from when they were used in the First and Second Chechen Wars, and it's just, it's terrible, to say the least. It's very tough to read about. You can go and read about it if you would like. The same thing with Isolation Colony, also known as Penal Colony number 52, equally very terrible to read about, which is where currently the Azov are that were defending Mariupol. But according to Ludmila Denisova, who is the Ukrainian Parliament Commissioner on Human Rights, over the last week, Russian aggressors deported about 3,000 Ukrainian civilians, including 300 children, from Mariupol to a filtration camp in the village of Bezemin in the Donetsk region. This filtration camp is expected to be able to hold, at least according to Russian media, over 100,000 people. This is one of the reasons why they are talking about genocide. This is one of many reasons to be talking about genocide, including the fact that their war crimes are literally from the Convention on Genocide. But that's beside the point. This is one of the major reasons. We know that filtration camps in the past have been used for systematic beatings, rape, torture, and summary execution, as well as deprivation of food, water, sleep, sanitation, and medical assistance. All of these things occurred inside of a concentration camp. Of course, concentration camps also conducted medical experiments on twins and other people, but that's I think to an extent a little past in this day and age, but still the conditions are absolutely unfathomably terrible. The same thing in the isolation colony, which is even considered to be worse than a regular filtration camp. And this is very concerning when you're talking about people being deported to them in the thousands. Forced deportation, as I have already talked about, is also against the Geneva Convention, unless it's for the safety and security of the civilians involved, in which case it is permitted. However, military operations in Mariupol have ceased, and therefore there is no longer a major risk to the civilian population in a result of conducting military operations within the region. Therefore, there is no legal standpoint in which to be deporting civilians from Mariupol itself. And you can go back and reflect on our prior streams where we talk about and actually bring up the Geneva Convention and customary rules of international law. And this brings us over to the Kherson Oblast. And that's because we see T-72s getting flatbedded. Now, when we got this submitted originally, they said they're pulling more old equipment out of storage. I actually went through and I actually did my armor identification on this to determine it was in fact a T-72 tank that are being flatbedded. They are being pulled out of storage facilities. Once again, Russia built an eye-watering number of T-72. I mean, absolutely eye-watering number of T-72 tanks. I mean, it's insane. They have literal tank hulls that are just rusting in the middle of like Siberia right now at some old abandoned factories because they built so many T-72s. They had no way of completing all of them. They had no way. The amount in storage alone would make any military leader cry. It is the most heavily used tank in the world. It is just insane how many of these things they built. And they've upgraded a lot of them. That's actually what we're seeing here. We're seeing upgraded versions of the T-72. These ones are older upgrades. The most obvious upgrade, of course, is the external boxes. You also have the external boxes on the turret, the replacement of the snorkeling system on the back, the explosive reactive armor that is currently these little blocks that you see around here. That's reactive armor to help it survive single charge warheads. And sometimes they're trying to build some for the tandem warheads, such as the Javelin and other anti-tank missiles. Not very effective as of yet. You also see this, like I said, the smoke screen dischargers, which are off here on the side. Those can also be used for illumination flares. But the key giveaways of the T-72 regarding this fact is, one, the turret. Two, it is lacking the boxes on the sides where the skirt currently is. 3, the snorkeling system being used here, the placement of the forward of the bore evacuator on the turret, and also the headlight setup on the front of the turret. Older models do not have this setup unless you're talking about a T64. However, a T64 would have stamped road wheels and not milled, which is what we're seeing here. You can see the grooves here in the bottom. So these are newer tanks. They are T72s. They are upgraded T72s, which means that they are more or less effective in combat, but they're going to run into the exact same issues the same tanks ran into earlier in the war. What they're looking for now is quantity over quality. That is why you're looking at T62s being brought into action. T62s, it doesn't matter if they're old or new, if they're going to get blown up by a $100,000 missile, the more I have, the quicker they run out of missiles. The issue is if they have the crew and the fuel to have all of these, but that's a whole separate issue. But quantity over quality is what they're going for now. And that's going through Melitopol and on its way over to the Kherson Oblast to help stall this offensive up here, because we know Ukrainian forces are conducting a counteroffensive coming from Mykolaiv through the Kherson Oblast. There's heavy fighting in this region right now. It's been rather heavy fighting over the last few weeks and months, and we're going to continue to see heavy fighting in this region, but we do not have a lot of individual reports regarding the ongoing conflicts. And so that actually concludes everything inside of Ukraine currently. So we're going to go ahead and move on to a lot of international news. And so we're going to continue on. And the first thing that we have is actually down here in Serbia. And Serbia actually signed a deal with Russia for a 3-year gas contract with them. Russia is really facing some strain economically because of the sanctions and the proposed sanctions. And they are selling a lot of their goods at a very, very high discount. Sometimes in upwards of 70 to 90% discounted. However, Serbia has very good relations with Russia. There's a lot of someone actually Guillermo actually brought up the city of Kharkiv actually looks a lot more like Sarajevo. But because of the Bosnia-Herzegovina conflict with Serbia and Kosovo and there's just a lot of ethnic, and these countries do not like each other at all. The fact that these countries are at peace is really a miracle in and of itself, and it's a very fragile peace. And we've seen shipments of weapons and equipment going into Serbia. Now they're signing deals with Russia. Russia has a friend in Serbia, as do a lot of Eastern countries. And that is also a growing point of contention within this region. And it's very possible that war could break out at any point in time between Bosnia-Herzegovina, Serbia, and Kosovo. So that's just an unfortunate fact, but that is what is currently ongoing within this region. That fragile peace is constantly being tested. Jump up into Poland, and Poland actually offered to be a security guarantor. So a security guarantor means that should Ukraine, so what they're saying is once the war ends, Poland will guarantee Ukraine's security. That is what it means. And to be a security guarantor means that should Ukraine be attacked again by Russia or Belarus, that Poland would be legally obligated to participate in the conflict directly, meaning Polish troops go into Ukraine and fight Russia, which has a lot of questionable ramifications, considering Poland is a NATO country. So does that drag in the rest of NATO? Who knows? But that is what they're currently stating. That's what they're currently talking about. They're saying, hey, we have an obligation, and once the war officially ends, because it's a little late for anyone to jump in to this war, if they were going to do it, they were going to do it some time ago. But Poland being a NATO country, they're not going to be doing that right now. But they're saying once the war ends, we will guarantee the security of Ukraine, because, of course, Ukraine is taking some hits. Ukraine's military is taking some hits. They've had to conduct some tactical withdrawals. They are it's a war. People are dying. Things are getting destroyed. Equipment is being destroyed and depleted. And so Ukraine, while putting up a valiant defense right now, even after the war is over, there truly is no victor, and they're both going to be weaker. So is Poland going to take back his land too? A quarter of Ukraine was Poland. No. Poland is not going to be taking back anything in Ukraine. That would not go. I mean, Ukraine was also part of the Soviet Union, and parts of Ukraine were also part of Imperial Russia, and you can see how the response is to that. So Poland attempting to do that would not go very well for Poland. And also, things have changed in the last couple of 100 years, and the only person that doesn't seem to understand that is President Putin. And as we continue over into Russia, actually, we can see the dead have started. We've seen the dead come home, but the amount is staggering. When I say that these changes are going to come as these bodies come home, look at the amount of dead here. Each of these is a husband, a son, a father, a brother, an uncle, a cousin. This is what makes people angry. This is what turns populations against a conflict. This is why the war in Afghanistan and Iraq became questionable. Afghanistan more than Iraq, because the war just didn't seem to end. And young men and women continue to die. This is the same downfall regarding the United States involvement in Vietnam. I mean, 58,000 Americans killed in Vietnam. And that makes an impact on the civilian population. There isn't anybody during the Vietnam era that was not impacted by the war in Vietnam in some way, shape, or form. Everyone knew somebody that went to Vietnam and or was killed in Vietnam or wounded in Vietnam. Or the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. 20 years of war in Afghanistan. Everyone was impacted at some point. This war is no different. The Russian people, a Russian is no different than you or me as a human being. They are not any different. And something like this is going to deeply impact how they think of this war. When mothers and wives and children begin to question because their husband, son, brother, whoever came home in a casket or didn't come home at all, that is when the questions become raised within the population. And yet another interesting comment that this is just another family who will bring their photo. This is not the Great Patriotic War. This is not the Great Patriotic War. We've seen resistance in Russia already in many different ways to this war. This is not the Great Patriotic War. This is not World War II. This is not fighting actual Nazis. They're not fighting actual Nazis. There is no Nazism anymore. We destroyed it. Are there extreme white ring people who think the Nazis may have been good? Yeah. But they have that everywhere. There's that in Russia. There's that in the United States. They're in Poland. They're in China. They're in Ukraine. They're in everywhere. They're in the very country you've probably met one and didn't know it. But this is not the Great Patriotic War. People are going to question this. As the more and more dead come home, people are going to ask questions. And those questions are filled usually with anger. And so that is the state of Russia currently. And as you switch over here into Switzerland, this is coming out of Geneva, and the World Health Organization gave another update regarding the monkeypox epidemic. So They are currently saying that the monkeypox constitutes a moderate risk to overall public health at a global level. So this is a little bit of an escalation in what they were saying just a couple days ago. As of May 26th, a total of 257 confirmed cases and 120 suspected cases have been reported in 23 member countries of the WHO, and that does not constitute an endemic of the virus thus far, and no fatalities, but that does show an increase from the pathogen. And it's the thing about this virus is it has to be given through intimate contact. So really something skin on skin, who has an active rash. So it's not as easily infectious as, say, another. It's not like another COVID thing. It's got a very distinctive rash to it, and they can easily contain it if you just wash really well and self quarantine. That's really it. Like, oh wow, I have a really weird rash, I probably shouldn't go to work today. Like, that's about it. And wash. You could get a fever, you could get some aches along with it, but I just got done getting sun poisoning, man. Listen, it really sucked, but I got better. So not anything different from that. And of course, we're getting this from Reuters, so if you want to check out more on what's going on with that, you can. I wouldn't be too afraid at this point. As we jump down here and we move out of Europe and slowly into the Middle East, we can take a look here at Turkey. And Turkey is actually celebrating the 597th anniversary of Istanbul's capture. So President Erdogan, actually, of Turkey, is celebrating the 597th anniversary of the fall of Constantinople, which is now known as the city of Istanbul. Now, what Constantinople was it was a city in the Byzantine Empire, which was formerly known as the East Roman Empire. It was named after Emperor Constantine I of Rome, and it went all the way until Emperor Constantine the 11th, who actually died at the fall of Constantinople in 1453. So this happened all the way from the Romans, okay, founding Constantinople, bringing their capital to Constantinople. Rome falls. Constantinople is then squeezed slowly over time until the Ottoman Empire, which is now known as Turkey, actually takes over the city, and all the way in 1453. So we're talking about like 10 centuries worth of history here. Constantinople fell in 1453, and that was really the final hurdle for the Ottoman Empire to really rule this entire region. And the Ottoman Empire ruled clear up until their defeat during World War I. And that was truly afterwards, after World War I, was really the immediate collapse of the Ottoman Empire, with the only surviving piece of it truly being Turkey. The Ottoman Turks. So, very cool. A lot of history in that. It's very far-running history as well. But a lot of cool information. A lot of cool stuff going on regarding that. It's a major historic event. I did not know that Kyiv was actually founded at the same time or was founded on the same day that Constantinople fell, which is kind of cool. Obviously not the same year, but the same day of the year. And we're going to go ahead and drop down here, and we're going to drop into the Middle East. And the first thing we have is coming out of Egypt's Sinai Peninsula. And that's because the counterterrorism operation, or CTO, as is widely reported, left 10 Islamic State militants killed, and another one was actually detained by government forces in the northern Sinai Peninsula. Now, there was a video regarding this. I did not feel like I wanted to feature it, because while the opening of it's innocent enough, I didn't want to mess up and we get into the really not so fun parts of it. A lot of gore there. But the Sinai Peninsula is really a hotbed for terror activity currently. There's a lot of stuff that's going on there, a lot of Islamic State currently activities going on there. But with the government forces captured a lot of communications equipment, weapons, IEDs, and IED components that could be used to make IEDs. So very good raid there. Obviously very successful on their part. Now, as we jump up here, Palestine and violence the violence within Israel and Palestine continues as aggression builds up once again between Palestinians and Israelis. Palestinians, really tired of being oppressed by Israel, have begun to attack buses filled with Israelis, at least within the occupied zones. We can see that here. Keep in mind that this comes immediately after Jerusalem sees very violent protests as thousands of Israelis march through waving their flag through East Jerusalem all the way to the Damascus Gates, which is the main entry to the Muslim quarter of Jerusalem's old city. And they are screaming, "The nation of Israel lives, and death to Arabs." So a lot of this has ethnic and religious tensions behind it, always has and always will, and there's a lot of it. And this has caused some rather severe things, especially some rather severe repercussions from the Israelis, to include airstrikes, some police brutality, which we've featured on here, so really violent raids by the Israelis, and now they're just straight up, they're being rather anti-Semitic to say the least. But the Israeli police in riot gear blocked the surrounding streets, forcibly removed Palestinian protesters from the route. 79 Palestinians were injured by the police using rubber bullets. They were using flashbangs, pepper spray, and one protester was shot with live ammunition. 28 have been evacuated to the hospital following the clashes, and more than 50 people were arrested and detained for incidents regarding of riots and assaulting police officers. So, not very good situation. Not very good situation at all. We could take a look at this regarding that march that they had. But there's a lot. Once again, there's a lot of religious and ethnic tensions here in the region, in Israel and Palestine, and it's really heating up again. And we've seen it heat up over the last couple of months, and it's escalating in violence rather significantly on both sides. Nothing in Syria today, but there's a couple things out of Iraq, and that's because, once again, another Islamic State attack occurred in Kirkuk. This time, the Islamic State fired some RPGs in an Iraqi military barracks there in Kirkuk. We actually have a couple of photos regarding that. So there is the barracks. This is all coming from of course, the Islamic State themselves on their official posts. There's them firing the RPG. Well-timed shot. And you can see the impact of the RPG on the barracks there. So, it's another hit-and-run attack. The Islamic State are not going to just openly go into close quarters combat with them. They really conduct a lot of IED attacks and a lot of hit-and-runs. And sometimes you will see them actually assault like police stations, local police stations, because they can quickly overwhelm them. They'll get a bunch of equipment, and before reinforcements show up, they get out of Dodge. And that's really how they're supplying their forces. So, no one really talks about Catholic churches in the Holy Land. Well, yes. I'm not going to talk about a lot of religious stuff on the channel or politics. I'm going to stay rather apolitical as much as I can on this channel. While I do have my personal biases and I'm not perfect when I do these things. But there is a lot of religious tension, and Israel is a majority Jewish population, because Israel was founded as a place for the as a homeland, as a nation for the Jews surviving the Holocaust and the immediate repercussions of that, and everything that happened during World War II. That is when Jerusalem was founded, or when not Jerusalem, but when Israel as a nation was founded inside of Palestine, and it was really an arbitrary decision. And that did not go very well for the Muslim and Arab majority in the region at the time, which was the Palestinians, because this used to be Palestine, and they were supposed to jointly get along together, and that really didn't go well. But it's mostly Jews and a lot of Muslims religiously in this region, with a minority of Catholics and Protestants. And other faiths as well. I mean, this is still it's still a lot of faiths in this region, but that's kind of the two majorities here, and that's where the tension really is, because the two religious majorities do not get along very well, and also one group is Arab and one group is not Arab and is predominantly Caucasian. And they also do not get along with each other on ethnic lines because of that. So they both claim it as a Holy Land. There's a lot of reasons for that. There's a lot of history for both in this. Jerusalem is jointly operated, but it's not perfect. And to go back to Iraq, we actually come down here into Diyala province, where we see that Iraq has released some footage regarding airstrikes conducted against the Islamic State using F-16 fighter jets that they used to target several trading camps and hideouts. So we can they said that at least 3 terrorists were killed during the strike. And take a look at this. It does have some copyright music, but we're going to take a look at the video. Just silence the tab. This is some FLIR footage that we have here. It looks like there's strike on the training camp. It looks like they're targeting at least one of the militants there. He's trying to get away. They hit him with a bomb. I'm sure he's not the only one. It looks like they had multiple targets on screen. It was just they were focused on that guy. He's probably center mass. Another group here. Once again, another piece of ordnance dropped against them. You have to understand, Iraq has no quarter for when it comes to terror organizations. Iraq has suffered greatly under insecurity, instability, insurgencies, terror organizations, the Ba'ath Party. Iraq's had a really rough time the last 40 years, and they really have no interest in giving these guys any quarter, and they're not really going to. And they have a lot of instability currently, not just because of the Islamic State, because of other groups like Kataib Hezbollah, which is an Iranian-backed militia that assists the government but really hates coalition forces and actually actively engages coalition forces, which is why we bombed them, which led to the Baghdad embassy incident in 2020. But that's a story for another day. As we move further east, we actually jumped over here into Nepal, a country that we don't really talk about a whole lot. But there's actually a plane crash in Nepal. Terra Air, which lost contact shortly after, a Terra Air flight lost contact shortly after taking off from the Pokhara airfield. On board there are 19 passengers and 3 crew. That makes a total of 22 souls on board. And they were heading for Joms, and over the route they passed over the highlands. Currently, they said that they have found the aircraft, and rescuers have located the approximate crash site, and they are currently going for the aircraft. They said the aircraft crashed the mouth of the Lamshay River. Military personnel were sent to the scene, so it's somewhere along this route. I could not exactly pinpoint, just because I don't know the geography of Nepal too well. But that is currently the situation in Nepal. No updates regarding Sri Lanka or anything going on in Jammu and Kashmir. or in China versus Taiwan. But we're going to jump over here, actually, into the Democratic Republic of the Congo here in Africa, where 27 civilians were killed during an attack on a village near Beni, which is North Kivu. So 27 civilians were killed, as well as at least 2 soldiers who were killed that are known at this point by Islamic State militants in the village of Biu-Namiyama, which is in the Beni area of North Kivu. The locals also reported the attacks took place in neighboring villages where additional civilians killed, as well as military personnel. So that is currently the situation. We've seen several attacks by the Islamic State in North Kivu. We know they're operating within this region. We also know that the Islamic State is in general operating rather heavily in Africa, and it's really considered, and after a summit in Morocco and currently one going on in Equatorial Guinea, they are really they are saying that the Islamic State and terror organizations such as Al-Qaeda and its affiliates are really the forefront of that attack of the fighting. These terror organizations is now in Africa. It is no longer in the Middle East. And that rings true on a lot of levels because of the amount of backing and the amount of ability and the amount of military capabilities that these terror organizations now hold in Africa. And there are crisis response forces in Africa from coalition partners assisting African forces in fighting off the terror organizations within their countries. And we jump over across the Atlantic and into South America, where we see that heavy rains leave 56 dead and many more missing and injured. Specifically, 25 have been injured and an additional 56 are currently missing, specifically in the state of Pernambuco. Sorry, I really cannot pronounce this, which is right here. And they've seen some rather heavy rains that have caused landslides and flooding in the Recife area. And they said that the area is still at high risk and they need to seek shelter elsewhere. More than 3,900 people have also lost their homes. And so it is just a rather terrible situation. We have a photo here regarding some of those landslides. So if you have any information on any organizations that we can look at for supporting what's going with the recovery efforts and also getting humanitarian aid to this region, please let us know on our Discord. We're always, and that goes with any region, please let us know on our Discord. We go through and we vet these organizations personally, so let a staff member know, whether it's myself or any of the other staff members listed, and we can get that vetting process started and actually get that added onto the stream, and that would be greatly appreciated. We look for them ourselves, but there's a lot of people out there with a lot of different wealths of knowledge. We could really use the help, so please let us know if you find any, and we want to be able to help the people in this region. Same thing goes with the Durban region here in South Africa. We're still looking for something for them as well, because they did also go through some rather terrific rains and subsequent flooding. We're actually going to pop up here into North America first, and we have 16 were injured at the Barclays Center panic. The Barclays Center, which is in Brooklyn, people thought that they were there for a boxing match, and around 1 a.m. people heard a very loud sound. They said it sounded like a gunshot, and people started frantically running, and what this caused is roughly 16 people to be injured as a result of the stampede. The NYPD said that no gunfire went off, but they're investigating the incident. So they are taking a look at it now, but we can see kind of the panic here. once again, an unfortunate situation, but this really comes as a result of several mass shootings that have occurred over the last couple of weeks in the United States. And so people are a little bit on edge about gunmen in highly crowded areas currently. And as we jump up here to Montreal, Bombardier the aircraft company Bombardier revealed the Global 8000, which is the fastest passenger aircraft in the world since the creation of the Concorde. It has overcome the speed of sound on economically friendly fuel, which is really what the concern was regarding or environmentally friendly fuel. I'm sorry, but that was one of the major concerns, as well as the economic abilities of the Concorde. It just wasn't sustainable, and it also caused a massive amount of pollution because when you go to the speed of sound, you burn a lot of fuel. But this aircraft covers a record range this is a business jet. It's a much smaller jet, but it covers roughly 8,000 miles or 13,000 kilometers. The aircraft will enter service officially in 2025 with a capacity of 19 people, and it will even have a bed, a bath, with a shower. So it's going to have a bathroom, which is pretty cool. So very cool aircraft, very cool personal jet. I will never be able to afford this, but it would be really cool to fly in it at least one time. And finally, to wrap up the night, we actually jump down here to Bolivia, where they actually found an ancient civilization. So it's a lost prehistoric civilization, or a lost pre-Hispanic civilization, I should say, which really beats out some long-standing scientific debates of whether or not the region was able to sustain a large population. So they shot millions of lasers from a helicopter flying over the Amazon basin and revealed unknown settlements within the region. So it indicates it's the Casarabe people. And they lived within the region between 8,500 and 1,400. They're more numerous than previously thought because they were originally thought to have been a rather small in population. But the light detection, they used light detection and ranging, in which thousands of infrared lasers pulsed around and bounced off every second off of terrain to reveal archaeological structures buried deep within the dense vegetation of the jungle. And so this discovers a lot of unknown settlements, and this is something that has been used to very good extent to find unknown civilizations and their ruins within the Amazon before, and has been proven very effective. So they found everything from roads to causeways, reservoirs, canals, and that was really centered on two large Casarabe settlements, now called Katoka and Lavdiar and Londiar. So very cool. This is kind of where they were. The Casarabe culture were in the very farther south part of Bolivia. So a very cool situation indeed. So it's always cool to hear about this stuff. So this is some of the images that were put back from them, so you can see some of the outline of that civilization, the roadways, the structures inside of some of those settlements. And that's actually that laser that they were talking about, those where they pulse those laser beams out of. So really cool, really effective, and it's a very large leap when it comes to scientific technology for archaeology. I mean, each region has its own distinct challenges when it comes to archaeology, and a lot of stuff we just may never know. But to be able to basically find a lost civilization is a really big deal. I mean, there's are always going to be gaps in our knowledge. I mean, there are some things that will just always be lost to time. How many millions of types of bacteria that will never have been fossilized, and how many? I mean, a lot of the creatures we have are that we know of are just ones that made it down the tree of evolution. How many different species failed to exist because of evolution? I mean, the natural selection. How many of them are just wiped off the record? Millions and billions of species, trillions of species. And the same thing goes with civilizations. There are entire civilizations we only know of because the Romans wrote about them. there are only civilizations we know of because of other, of small findings in the middle of a jungle, in the middle of nowhere that no one else would care to look, and the technology just now is good enough to find them. So very cool. I hope we find more. I hope they go and they begin to excavate and actually study up close and personal with some of these settlements, so we can understand how these people lived, who they were, what they cared about, and see kind of what these people were just kind of like, and fill in some of the gaps in our own human history. And it's kind of nice to end on a couple of good notes. I really enjoy ending on good notes. I don't like talking about depressing things all day, as unfortunately that is just what a lot of the news is. There's a lot of really terrible things going on. The stuff in Brazil is really terrible to hear about. The plane crash that's in Nepal, the war currently ongoing in Ukraine, the conflicts in the Middle East, the conflicts with the terrorism in Africa. I mean, a lot of stuff is just really terrible, and it's good to end on a couple of good news. And I really hope we get a lot of nice stories in the future and less depressing stuff. But that is the news, and I hope that you enjoyed. I hope that you enjoyed how we deliver it, and me answering. I answered a lot of questions tonight coming from a couple of individuals in the chat. I enjoy answering these questions. I'm sorry if some people don't enjoy that kind of a format, but as I get them, I try and answer them. That's just how it goes. I will try to be a little bit selective in the ones that I answer, just so I can stay on topic. But I have a lot of useless knowledge. It's not really good for anything else. But I hope you do enjoy. I hope that you find this very helpful and full of knowledge for you. If you ever have any more questions, you can always find us on our Discord, and there's a lot of good staff members, and not just myself, but a lot of people who have a large wealth of knowledge, that you can pick our brains, that you can have great discussions in there. We have different sections for all regions of the world. But more than that, we have the links on there for our donations, not just in the video description, but also on our Discord, and that continually gets updated. There's also announcements on there, so you can find out when we're not going to be streaming, which will be tomorrow, actually. We will not be streaming tomorrow. Tomorrow is Memorial Day, and it's also Monday, which we usually take off. So we will not be streaming tomorrow, as a reminder. So I hope you guys have a wonderful Monday. And if you're in the United States, I hope you enjoy your Memorial Day. Please check out the video description, and if not, check out the section on the Discord specifically regarding donations and fundraisers. And we want to be able to help with a lot of these depressing stories going on. The war in Ukraine is absolutely terrible. Though the stuff that's going on in Africa is absolutely deplorable. The stuff going on in Southeast Asia with their recovery efforts, I really am sorry that so many people have to suffer because of extreme weather. And I want to be able to help these people, and the only way we can do that is with your support. So please check out the video description below, and check out the fundraisers and donation links that we have down there. We went through and we vetted them, and not only did we make sure that they were good organizations, that they were actually in fact official, but also we want to make sure that 80% or more of your donations actually go to helping the people directly. So please check them out. We want to make sure that it's not going to salaries and administration costs. We want to actually help people and do meaningful change in the world. And the only way we can do that is with you. So if you can't give a lot, give a little. If you can't give anything at all, give us a like and subscribe, because it helps us reach more people. More people can come here and enjoy the stream and the former videos that come out as a result. And also, the more people that can come here and help and donate and join our community and help us do great things in the world and help people that truly need it. So I appreciate all of the support that you've given us. Don't just give it to me, give it to the entire team, because I only lend my voice. The entire rest of the staff team really is the ones that make this and put it together, and I just add the points here on a map and talk about it all night long. So please give your thanks to them. They are a wonderful group of people, very knowledgeable in what they're talking about, and we will continue to do this, but we will see you guys on Tuesday night. I hope you once again enjoy your Monday. I hope that for those, you enjoy your time off if you live in the United States or other countries that observe Monday as a holiday. And I hope you guys remain safe, that your family and your friends remain safe. And I hope that you guys, if you don't have that safety and security, I hope that you guys find that in the very near future. And I do truly mean that. I know I say it every night, but there's a lot of bad stuff going on, and I know some of my viewers may be affected. So I hope that you guys do find that safety and security in the very near future. And once again, we're here trying to help you do so. And with that, I hope you guys have a great night. Stay safe, guys. My name is Paul from the New News. Have a great night. Bye.